is what? Their surrender. Which takes us to the next subtopic, which is the Confederate surrender at Appomattox. Did you get a chance to go there, by any chance, my dear, when you were down there? Did you go to Appomattox, Virginia? Might be another thought. The Confederate surrender at Appomattox. Well, on April 7th of 1865, after the surrender of Richmond, General Grant officially asked General Lee to surrender. On April 7th, 1865, General Grant officially asked Lee to surrender. Lee thought about it for 2 days. And on April 9th, 1865, General Lee agreed to General Grant's terms of surrender. So think about that. On April 7th, 1865, General Grant officially asked Lee to surrender. By officially asking him, what does he include in his request? Grant's terms of surrender. Okay? Lee thought about that for 2 days and finally accepted the terms of surrender, which is kind of interesting because was Lee giving anybody else any terms of surrender? He was known as unconditional surrender Grant. That's how much respect Grant had for Lee, is he gave him terms of surrender, and after 2 days of preparation and thought, Lee agreed to those terms. So on that same day of April 9th, 1865, the two great Civil War generals met at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. So I want to go through that again with you. On April 7th, 1865, General Grant officially asked General Lee to surrender. With that official request, he gave Lee the terms of surrender, what he would accept if Lee would surrender and what he would give back. Lee thought about those terms of surrender for 2 days, and on April 9th, 1865, he agreed to those terms, and the two great Civil War generals met at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. I want you to listen carefully and write down the difference in appearance between the two generals. Lee was in full dress uniform with a jeweled stud sword at his side. Lee was in full dress uniform with a jeweled stud sword at his side. What's a jeweled stud sword mean? In the handle of the sword, he had what embedded? Jewels. Okay, very prim and proper. Okay, so he showed up to surrender in full dress uniform, everything pressed to a T, with his jeweled stud sword at his side. Grant, much different. He actually wore a private's shirt, a shirt that a normal private would wear. It was unbuttoned at the neck, and he actually wore muddy boots. So he came in much less formal capacity than Lee did. Lee again wore a full dress uniform. He had a jeweled stud sword at his side. Grant wore a private shirt that was unbuttoned at the neck with muddy boots. The man that actually drafted the terms of surrender officially on paper was Eli Samuel Parker, who was Grant's military secretary. So the man that actually drafted and wrote down the terms of surrender for the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse on April 9th, 1865, was Grant's military secretary, Eli Samuel Parker. The terms of surrender offered by Grant were both simple and honorable. And I'll give you the terms. Terms of surrender offered by Grant were simple and honorable. Number one, the defeated Confederates would be required to sign pledges promising not to fight against the Union any longer. The defeated Confederates would be required to sign pledges promising not to fight the Union or bear arms against the Union any longer. That was the first term of surrender, that the defeated Confederates would be required to sign pledges promising not to fight against the Union any longer. The second term of surrender is the Confederate soldiers were required to surrender their weapons. Confederate soldiers were required to surrender their weapons. That'd be kind of a difficult thing, wouldn't it? Nobody wants to surrender weapons. The third term of surrender was that General Grant allowed Confederate officers to keep their pistols, keep their swords, keep any horses or mules that they had. So General Grant allowed Confederate officers to keep their pistols, their swords, their horses and mules. And then he softened a little and he said this, tell me what it means. He said, let all the men who claim to own a horse or mule take the animals home with them to work their little farm. So what did he really do? Well, not so much that, but it wasn't just officers. Mostly officers had horses. But if there was an infantryman, which was impossible, more likely a cavalryman that surrendered, who still had possession of his horse, he would let him take the horse.
So that's the part of it.
It's part of, yeah, it's just part of 3. I'm just making a point that his terms of surrender said Confederate officers could keep their pistols, swords, horses, and mules, but he later let anyone on the Confederate side that had a horse or mule take them. Now, were there a lot of men that had those? No, but there were some cavalry that did, okay? Now, after those terms of surrender were announced and written down by Eli Samuel Parker, a very, very proud General Lee surrendered officially to General Grant, and he signed the document. So after those terms were announced, a very, very proud General Lee agreed and surrendered to General Grant. After his surrender, he simply mounted his famous horse Traveler and rode off. Now this isn't much different in a way than a competitive game. What do you think Union troops started to do after it was signed? General Lee got on his horse and rode off. What did they start to do? Celebrate and cheer. And Grant ordered them to be silent. So Union troops, after General Lee mounted his horse Traveler and began to ride off, Union troops began to cheer, which probably wasn't unusual. But General Grant ordered them to be silent. Now, because everybody hadn't got the memo yet, there was still cannon fire in the distance. They were still fighting, and word hadn't got out yet. They weren't going to stop fighting in Virginia, were they, until this thing was signed. So picture this in your mind. Lee signs the document. He gets up on his horse Traveler. He begins to ride off. Union soldiers start to cheer. Grant tells them to be silent. You can hear in the background nearby cannon fire, and Grant states to one of his aides, he says, quote, tell them to stop that racket. The Southerners have surrendered. I see no reason to embarrass them further. So he actually went and had a courier go and tell the cannon fire to cease, because he felt like it was simply just rubbing salt in the wound. So he said again, tell them to stop that racket. The Southerners have surrendered. I see no reason to embarrass them further. Okay, that will take us to 2 short subtopics, one of which I'll give you a handout, but the first one's called Final Effects of the Civil War. Final Effects of the Civil War. Now, there's a lot to tell you here. Write down what you want. The reason I'm committed to showing you the movie, The Blue and the Gray, is because families on both sides of this conflict, North and South, would now have to reunite to grieve the loss of their loved ones. Okay? I want you to listen to this because this is pretty interesting. Civil War historians have noted that all families, regardless of which side they fought on in the Civil War, felt the tragic event of losing at least one loved one in the conflict. Historians believe that not one family that was involved in that fought didn't lose a loved one. And casualties sometimes were devastating on one family alone. They may have lost most of their family. Now, in this movie, The Blue and the Gray, it's about two families, the Geisers and the Hales. Hales from the north in Gettysburg, Geisers in Virginia. They're related. They're brothers and sisters, cousins. And they're going to end up on two opposite sides of this war, and you're going to follow through the movie what happens to family members on both sides. And it's such a great video because it encompasses everything we've talked about. One of them will fight in the Battle of the Wilderness. One of them will be at Vicksburg when it's under siege. One of them will be in the first Battle of Bull Run. Matter of fact, in the first Battle of Bull Run, you're going to have these cousins fighting against each other. They don't even know it. So it's a wonderful movie, and I really want you to enjoy it and keep track of those characters. And when I come back, I just am very confident you're going to say, man, that was the best movie I've seen in a long time. It's fictional, but it's very moving. Okay? Now, that'll take us to our last subtopic, and I'll save you some writing here. I'm going to hand it to you, and that's casualties of the Civil War. You can just put this in your binder, and we'll talk about it. I think these numbers will absolutely astonish you. And Kylie, if you'd handle these extra ones coming to you over to Madison, that'd be great. All right, we got just about enough time to get through this and get the handouts out. Now just take a look at this. Let's talk about the Union losses. Incredible. Killed in action, 110,070. Death resulted because of the war, 249,458. 275,175 wounded. Now I want to make sure you understand the statistic. The killed in action and the death resulted, that 110,000 is within that 249. You see that? So 634,703 Union deaths. Not or deaths or wounded. That's incredible. Over 500,000 on one side. Confederate losses, 74,524 killed in action, 124,000 deaths resulted, 137,000 wounded, 335,524 casualties. Now, when you think about the population difference between North and South, the Southerners actually came out maybe a little better, but not much. You know what I mean? So if you look at the total Civil War losses in the far right column on the bottom, almost 1 million dead or wounded. That's a lot of people. Yep.
How do they get these numbers?
Well, that's a great question. Are these 100% to the T accurate? No. But journals, counts, they did counts and things. So, you know, that number could be off 10, 20, 30,000 either way, probably. But almost 1 million, yeah.
So that's everyone that the journals were found at, so there could be more?
Could be more, yeah. Now, to put it in perspective, which is way off topic, in the Vietnam War, you know how many South Vietnamese civilians were killed? Civilians. Innocent civilians?
More than
this. Yeah, wait till we get into that. You won't believe it. So I want you just to keep this in your book. We certainly won't test you. Okay, I got some handouts and some serious explanation to do here. Here's your handout on the blue and the gray. These are the names that I'm going to want you to kind of keep track of. And we normally have a test on this, but I don't plan on having one as long as I get back and Mr. Gibbons feels like, and he will have a feeling on it because he's a history guy, that you guys got something on this. And we may discuss this just a little bit, you know what I mean, when I get back to see what you think. But I do want you to pick up these names. That doesn't mean you have to sit there and as soon as you hear a name, write it down. Maybe just do a little check mark. I mean, some of these are going to come pretty quick. But obviously you've got the Geiser family, you've got the Hale family, you've got some other people involved that have to do with the battle, people of personalities. But you can pick that up. So just kind of keep that in front of the movie and kind of go from there. I do want you to know who those people are.
There, we need another one.
One more? So you, both of those are just...
Just don't give it to me.
All right, put your names on these right away if you would when I give you this next one here. Put your name on it. This is your review for the test. You will have basically until Wednesday to get this thing taken care of, and there will be very little variation, if any, between this and your test. Okay, so let's just kind of look at it so you kind of know what you're up against here. There is 55 answers. They'll be worth 2 points apiece, so the test will be worth 110. Obviously, these matching make sense. The answers are on the back. Everyone has an answer. Nobody has two. And then you have short answer questions. List 3 of the 4 advantages that the North had over the South at the beginning of the Civil War. List 3 of the 4 advantages that the South had over the North at the beginning of the Civil War. What 2 things did Union General Winfield Scott offer Colonel Robert E. Lee during their meeting in April of 1861? Name two of the 3 reasons the Confederates wanted to win an important victory in Maryland during the Civil War, which turned out to be Antietam. What did the Emancipation Proclamation officially do? What were the 2 major reasons President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation? What was the fate of Buffalo soldiers if captured by Confederate troops during the Civil War? How long did Robert E. Lee serve the Union Army before his resignation? Who was the Union commander that organized Union troops that had retreated south of Gettysburg towards Cemetery Hill early in the battle? What were the 2 options that General Meade gave his commanders to vote on after they all assembled after the second day of fighting at Gettysburg? What was Robert E. Lee's 3-part strategy for July 3rd, 1863? What Union commander, along with his Michigan cavalry, foiled one of the 3 plans that Lee unleashed at Gettysburg on July 3rd, 1863, so fix that if you would. You know what my problem is we're like 100 years apart. So when I do these tests, I got 19 in my mind from 4th period and 18 in my mind from this period. That should be obviously 1863. What Union commander, along with his Union forces, captured Vicksburg, Mississippi on July 4th, 1863? After losing to rebel forces at Chickamauga Creek, Generals Grant, Sherman, and George Thomas arrived with reinforcements. These reinforcements led to Union victories at what 2 locations in Tennessee, securing the Tennessee-Georgia border for the Union? What Civil War battle that we talked about today, in which a head-on attack against 6 miles of rebel trench line occurred, resulted in Union troops pinning their names on their shirts so they would not die nameless? Give one example of Union General Sherman's practice of total war. Who was elected Vice President of the United States as a result of the election of 1864? And compare the appearance of both General Robert E. Lee and General Ulysses S. Grant during the Confederate surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia on April 9, 1865. Not too tough. If you fill this out and you know these answers, you will do very well on the test. Very well. So you got 4 or 5 days to get that done. So Monday, Mr. Gibbons is going to start the movie. Tuesday, movie. Wednesday, meet out in the Commons. After the test is over, he'll bring you back in and he'll spend the rest of the time telling you whatever he wants. Thursday, movie. Friday, movie. Okay? I think you'll be done. If you're not done, we'll deal with it when I get back from spring break and you get back from spring break. Hopefully we can get through it. Okay? Any questions at all on what your responsibilities are? If you miss lectures, everything from day 1 of this Civil War is on the website. So I'm not really going to give you a review. Here's your review. You can obviously work together on this, get yourself your answers correctly, and we'll see how we do Wednesday. Again, if you miss that test Wednesday, you will be responsible to make arrangements with Mr. Gibbons to take it before you leave for spring break, or you will get a 0, unless you're on your deathbed. Okay? Any questions at all on that? So, could be in good shape. When we get back, we're going to talk about Reconstruction and the assassination of Abraham Lincoln.